Hello, I'm a Yarralii Gamilaroi woman, and I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Darug people in Sydney, Western Sydney, and I send my respects out to the Darug elders, both past and present. And as I said, I acknowledge that many of you are coming from all different Aboriginal country today, including the Gadigal clan of the Eora Darug Nation, also down to Melbourne, where many are coming from the Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation, as well as the Dja Dja Wurrung people, and also Biripi Nation, Latchi Latchi, Gumbaynggirr, and many others. And I acknowledge that all those elders, both past and present, and also acknowledge the elders who are with me in the room here today, especially including Aunty Esme, one of our guest speakers, and also Uncle Roger, KBH survivor and elder of our people as well. And acknowledging country is a reminder that we live, work and play on Aboriginal land, always was, always will be. Now, before we get started, we might have a message from the Annecto CEO, Cheryl De Silva, before I introduce the speakers as well. Thank you, Cheryl.
And thank you, Paulette, and welcome everybody. It's a privilege to be here saying a few words, and thank you to our speakers. I'd also first like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung people. Thank you, Paulette, for acknowledging that. But on a personal basis, I'd like to acknowledge our traditional owners and pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging. Look, one of the questions I always ask myself around this time of year is, what can we as an organisation do? What can we do to ensure the conversation going forward is a positive one? What can we do to acknowledge the hurt and the suffering and the trauma that has gone on before, but contribute to a positive conversation going forward? And so part of what we are doing today and various other events that we're holding is to contribute to that conversation and let everyone be part of that in a really inclusive way. But we do need to understand that there has been a lot of trauma. People are still suffering, and this week particularly brings home a number of concerns, sadness, issues for many people, and that we must acknowledge that as well. What we can also do is be sensitive to this and work alongside and partner with organisations, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisations where we can make a difference, where we can contribute in a positive way. And so all of what we're doing today and this week pulls together good people wanting to work together to make a difference. And so I hope you enjoy today. Every one of these sessions that I've participated in has been really productive, really informative, and it helps educate some of us, and it helps others to understand what people are dealing with during this period of time. So thank you, Paulette, and thank you to all our speakers. Enjoy the session.
Thank you, Cheryl. And speaking of the session, the topic is trolls and trauma, understanding the experience of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the lead up to January 26, and how fellow Australians can become an ally. And our speakers today include Aunty Esme Bamblett, who is the CEO of the Aboriginal Advancement League in Melbourne. And the Aboriginal Advancement League is actually the longest running Aboriginal organisation in the country. and she's been at the helm since about 2008. And Aunty Esme's also got a lot of experience in Koori education as well, in various occupations there. And she's also the senior pastor of the Barak Christian Ministries, incorporated since about 2000. She's the president of the Fitzroy Stars Football and Netball Club, for those who are very interested in the sporting fields, and also a member of the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria. So thank you to Aunty Esme for joining us today. We also have Dr. and I should say that Aunty Esme is a doctor, Esme Bamblett as well. And thank you to also Tiffany McComsey, who's also a doctor. We've got 2 doctors with us today who can't prescribe anything, but they're very deadly women. And Dr. Tiffany McComsey is the CEO of Kinchela Boys Home Aboriginal Corporation, and she KBHAC is does have a partnership also with Annecto as well. And Tiffany completed her PhD in social anthropology at the University of Manchester, and she took a look at Aboriginal community development practices in Redfern for that part of her education as well. And she's also been involved in the Justice Reinvest New South Wales, looking at how to reduce the number of Aboriginal people who are caught up in the criminal justice system. And she's been a passionate advocate for the Aboriginal community for some time now. And I think she's been the CEO of KBH for, probably around 10 years. Is that right, Tiffany? And so she's been a long time supporter and advocate for Aboriginal people. And welcome both Aunty Esme and Tiffany to the guest speaking panel. And Mike, I might hand it over to you to introduce our third deadly speaker and that as well.
No worries, we thought we'd bring a bloke into it as well. Jeremy Heathcote. Jeremy's been the Deputy Chair of Babana Aboriginal, which Annecto has had a partnership with for maybe 8-9 years. We used to share an office together for a number of years, and he's the Deputy Chair there, and they do a lot of work in a number of areas and wellbeing, health and wellbeing, all sorts of areas we've been involved with, particularly suicide prevention. Annually, we've been involved with Babana. He's also a board member of the Inner Sydney Empowered Communities, a member of the Redfern Aboriginal Communities Alliance. He's a First Nations mentor and the 2020 Churchill Fellowship Medal. And yeah, besides that, he's a Parramatta supporter, which we'll let him get away with. Yeah, it's a good bloke.
We might kick off the conversation by talking a little bit about trauma in itself. And is trauma, breaking your leg, or is it something a lot deeper than that? We might go to, should we go to Aunty Esme first, Mike, and being the elder of our speaking panel, and we might ask all of you to, give us your thoughts on what actual trauma is.
I think there's different layers of trauma. I think there's, if we look at our community and look at trauma today, there's trauma that comes from today. There's transgenerational trauma that's there because of the history. And there's trauma in just kind of, not so much, but everyday kind of life that's not associated with being Aboriginal. But I think the trauma itself is something that is there. I think the trauma from the historical experience is really deep. And I think it's something that people don't realise as well. I think it's handed down. It's handed down through story, but also through actions. So I'll just give you an example of that. My grandmother was one of those people who, she didn't get taken, she didn't get stolen, but her mother swam the Murray River with her when she was 11 to get away from the police who came to get her. So she was really scared of policemen. And then her husband was murdered when she had 14 children. Her husband was murdered. And then a friend told her she better move because they're going to take the children off you. So she moved, and she moved 6 times to avoid getting her children taken off her. So I grew up with a real fear of policemen, and they had never done anything to me. But because of that fear of my grandmother, that passed down to me. And I was actually passing that on to I probably have passed it on to my children. So that trauma that was there from her, she didn't necessarily have to say to me, I'm really scared of policemen. It was just her actions that I knew she was. And that trauma is really deep for a lot of our mob. Now, Nan didn't get taken, but the fear of being taken was just as bad as being taken. And I think that it wasn't probably just as bad as being taken. Sorry, I wouldn't say that. People who have been taken, the trauma they've passed on to their children would be worse than that, because they've actually been taken from their parents and never got back. So I think that trauma is something that is really deep in our community from historical events. I also think there's trauma from the events of today, and that comes from the way society has viewed our mob, from racism, covert and not open, overt and covert. And I think that the trauma that our mob face every day in those areas is something from today. You can't say it's been passed down. It is probably actually been passed down to the wider community, because the racist attitudes don't just come from nowhere. And so that trauma is everyday trauma for our mob. And then, of course, you've got the trauma of just being in poverty and not being able to afford to buy food and pay your rent and all the things that happen there. So I think there's different layers of trauma, and I think our mob are dealing with all those layers.
Yes, and that does remind me of what you just said there, Aunty Esme, about, uncles who have survived KBH and not letting their children stay in a hospital because of fear of being taken, that sort of thing. So it does sort of come back to you and then pass on to the next generation as well. And, with the fear of police, I guess we all have an understanding that Aboriginal people usually run away from the police and running to the police for help, and that as well. So I can really hear that clearly coming from yourself. And Tiffany, I'd be interested to hear from your perspective, as well as being a non-Aboriginal person, but working with the stolen generations and the trauma that you've seen as well with working with our mobs.
Thanks, Paulette. I too would like to acknowledge that I'm on Gadigal country and pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and acknowledge Uncle Roger, who's my boss. I guess as a non-Aboriginal person, the honor that I feel for doing the work that I do, and a lot of that has to do with the trust of Uncle Roger and the other Kinchela Boys Home survivors. I can't understate that because I think it plays into that conversation around what is trauma and how do we hold trauma. And a lot of that has to do with safety and trust and the willingness to listen openly to those who have the courage and strength to actually talk through their experiences and what has happened. And I'm in awe of the uncles and the aunties who do that on an ongoing basis in the hope that someone will actually listen and hear what they're saying in order to make the changes that are needed to stop the trauma. And in hearing Esme, I saw a wonderful post the other day on Instagram, and it was a person saying, stop commending people for being resilient and instead redesign the systems that inherently make people suffer. And I think that really gets to this understanding of historical trauma that a lot of people don't acknowledge. And it's collective trauma, it's community trauma, especially when similar policies are still doing the same things that past policies did, that we now acknowledge were acts of genocide. And how do we create systems that don't achieve the same outcomes, even though they're meant to have different reasoning behind them? And with the uncles and the work that this organization does, when you're going back to communities where these uncles were taken from, or even going to McComsey, where Kinchela Boys Home existed as the institution that it was, that's in the country, that's in the landscape, that's in people's psyche, that's in people's spirits. And until we acknowledge that and want to have that healing and well-being actually a priority, it's always going to be there. So I think we need to find ways to work through what has happened, because the past is so visibly present for many community members. And I'm not just talking about elders, I'm talking about the multi-generational descendants of those survivors who lived through those policies.
Thanks for that, Tiffany. And I'm interested to hear your perspective also, Jeremy, on the issue of trauma and how it affects the men that you've worked with over your time.
Thanks, Paulette. Yeah, it's great to be here as well. I'm a proud Aboriginal man from Aboriginal Nation, here today on Environmental land at Parramatta. Our men's group, we've got men from all ages. So Aunty Esme, like you said, the historical trauma, a lot of our elders in our group have faced that. And as you both said, like the ones who are coming through now, future generations, they face the intergenerational trauma as well. I think the best thing that we do is we work together. We work with black, white, brindle, doesn't matter. On that positive mindset about how we can actually improve lives. Trauma is something that we need to improve. We've been focused on mental health at Babana for about 15 years now. Before that, we didn't do about it. We didn't really talk about it. That shame factor, which we see in our community too many times. But we lost 2 blokes, non-Aboriginal blokes, to suicide. So we took a stand and say that there's no more shame. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about trauma. Get out in the open. Because people can mull on that, and it takes out their wives, or they get on drink, get on gambling, things like that. If there's an avenue where they can actually come to a safe place, I think that cultural safety is really important. If we have a culturally safe place where someone can talk about their trauma and not feel shamed, and also look at avenues where we can actually help them. Babana, for a couple of years, we did a suicide prevention program for our community, and we worked with a lot of our mob, males and females. And when the trauma issues were coming up, we had psychologists, trained psychologists we referred to, and things like that. Guys that we knew were actually committed to our people. But trauma is not only just for us as either. Like when I was in the Churchill Fellowship, I did a 7-week trip over to America, Canada, and New Zealand. The same issues they're facing over there as well with trauma. So it's not just an issue we're facing here, it's an issue that I think needs to be knowledge of all First Nations people have the same issues when we've been invaded and things like that. So understanding that history as well and working closely with our non-Indigenous partners, like I said, we've worked with Annecto for almost 10 years now. Great partnership, always support our vision and what we're trying to do to improve our community's lives.
And Paulette, can I just say that that reminded me of a quote that I often use, because people will say, oh, look, that was 200 plus years ago. Why don't you get over it? That's one of the comments we hear. But Charles Perkins said it better. He said, we can't live in the past, but the past lives with us. So those things that have happened are still here. And unless there's reparation for what has happened, unless there's acknowledgement of what happened and reparation for the people it's happened to, then you continue to have the trauma that is there. Someone has to say it happened, and someone has to say, we owe you something for it. We owe people like Archie Roach, who passed away not long ago, had never saw his mother and father again, taken as an 8-year-old boy, didn't even know who they were. You've got to say to them, we have to do something about what happened. And I think that keeps the trauma alive if there's an injustice that has never been dealt with. And I think that's the issue that we're facing as well.
So thinking about, trauma and how the many different layers and how it affects our mobs and the intergenerational trauma as well, how then do we cope with things like the lead up to January 26, when there's so much debate and division and comments and trolls? How does that impact on the trauma that we've already lived with 24 hours, 7 days a week? And then we have periods like this, and then we also have the conversations around the voice for Parliament as well, that's happening as we speak. How do we deal with that?
I think in my experience, and I've done a lot of cultural education over the years, I've been around in education for a long time, and I know that there's probably 10% of people who are racist, really hardcore racist, could be 10 to 20%. They're not going to change their minds. They're going to be that. You've got to have people who will continue no matter what, because they actually don't like anybody, let alone us. So they're the ones that really, you're kind of wasting your time with them. But you've got probably 60 to 70% of the population who just don't know the truth. They've never been taught. Our schools have never taught the truth. Just starting to actually teach it in the last probably 5 years, really. When I went to school, my education did not consist of anything about our mob, except that we were hunters and gatherers, and that we, lived in a tribal way and all that sort of stuff. That's all we learned. So I never knew about the massacres, for example. I never knew about the stolen children. That wasn't taught when I went to school. Only through our mob who had experienced that, or someone had experienced it. That's the only way I learned it. So there's that mob of non-Aboriginal people who do not know the truth. When they do know the truth, it really opens their eyes, and they start to realise that all this stuff has happened to our people. And it's only really a relatively not that long ago history. It's not thousands of years ago. So we've not had time to recuperate from colonisation, really invasion. We haven't had time to recuperate from that. It's not that many generations ago that it's happened. So that there leads to the trauma. We need to educate people. We need to let them know the truth. We need to let them know that there were massacres. I mean, I've just watched the SBS and the Frontier Wars recently, and I was devastated. And even knowing it, I knew it, but to hear the personal stories and to see the thing where they've done that, that's really devastated me, even to hear that now. But you have to do that, and you have to go through that education process so that you can come out the other side and say, now I understand. Now I understand why Aboriginal people are ashamed, because that's happened to people who've put them down for that long. They've been made to feel ashamed. Our mob are not ashamed because they're ashamed. They've been made to feel ashamed. And that's passed on as well to the children. There's that somehow you're less than, that you're not as good as. So that's all part of that history. And education is really, you need to educate people. And most people I know that have been educated say, oh, I never knew that. I'm sorry. And they change. They start to unpack the trolls. We need to unpack what they're actually saying, why they're saying it, and what really, at the end of the day, what is their argument? What is the argument against changing the date? The argument is it's been that date forever and a day. It hasn't. It's been changed 3 times. That's gone out the window. The argument is that it's a really important day to Australians. We've made it that way. People have made it an important day. It has never been. It's only been actually since the riots, Cronulla riots in Sydney, that they started to really bring in this really pro-Labor, pro-Australia Day, you know, anthem sort of stuff that's happening. That hasn't been that long. It wasn't there when I was growing up. We had, you know, we considered Australia Day a holiday. I was happy to have a public holiday. So the things that people are saying about it is not true. It's only just really coming, and changing the date is easy. It's an easy ask. It's not something that's difficult. Let's face it. I hear someone on the radio the other day saying they should legislate Australia Day into the legal system so it can never be changed. Now, how ridiculous is that? Of course, you know what he said? Only 28% of the people agree with changing the date. How does he know? We've never had a referendum to say, should we change the date or not? How do people know how many people would be agreeable to changing the date, for example? So, you know, trolls come out with a lot of misinformation, and we need to really be educated for one, but we need to also unpack what the arguments are and see whether it's true. And I'm sure if I asked every single person online today, if someone came into your house and killed your parents on a particular day, and then there was a celebration on that day, would you want to celebrate? It goes down to that. And you know what it goes down to? It goes down to the lie that there was a colonisation, it was a peaceful settlement. It is a lie. It was an invasion. People's lives were torn apart. Tribes were torn apart. People were massacred. That's the truth. And when you get rid of the lie, people are like, I understand. I understand why Aboriginal people want to change the date. Sorry, I've got on my high horse then.
Thank you, Aunty Esme. Jeremy, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's really important, like Aunty Esme just mentioned about the date. It's been changed that many times. It was only been celebrated since, what, 94? I think they formalised Australia Day as such. So it's not something that's been out there forever, like the trolls always try and put out there. You can't change a date. It's how days always has been. But that education thing as well, I think it's really important. And not only the education from way back to the past when we were invaded, but also the years leading up to only, 50 odd years ago, we were given our rights as citizens of our country. And when I speak to people overseas, they don't believe that it was 67 we got that referendum. And some people here might not have been born. I wasn't born, thank God. So I was actually born a citizen of our country, but my parents weren't. You know, and so that once again goes back trauma as well as not being accepted as part of our own country. But I think, like you said about the trolls, that education is really important. There are those ones who will never change. But I think if we can talk about the facts about the real facts and not the fake news they try and spill on the media all the time. But I think one thing as well I've noticed recently is black fellas attack other black fellas, which I don't like that. Even if you don't agree with their stance on different things, like calling someone a coconut, for example, is just something I don't like. And I've seen that happen in the last couple of months, leading into The Voice and things like that. If you support The Voice or if you don't support The Voice, I'm on the fence personally. I really want a treaty, like your background ideas, mate. That's what I really want is a treaty. That's not part of this current campaign, but that's something I really want to see. But we shouldn't be attacking our own people. We get attacked, being Aboriginal as we are, right? We get attacked every day anyway. We cop that racism. We face it. People make comments they might not think are racist, but they are. So understanding that, and I think it's really important that we do stand up and support our own mob as well. If you hear someone say something, step up, especially for our non-Indigenous people here as well and our colleagues. If you hear anything racist at all, call it out. It's been going on. People let it go on too long. It snowballs into more abuse for our people. So I think that's one of the really big things. And like I said, Esme, that education. If we can educate people, the trolls will be out there, but we can try and change the mindset of those ones that 50-60% who are bite coming back on our side.
Now, speaking of trolls, I guess it might be an idea to maybe get a bit of a definition of what a troll is. And I know that Mike's sort of put some things together there about that. And we might be able to show that on the screen now, hopefully.
It was interesting, actually, Clody from our marketing team put that together because I'm not actually that young, so I was trying to work out all the definitions for trolling. But the thing I hear was really about the bullying. It's bullying, right? And bullying continues when it's not held to account and it uses intimidation. And so the question around trolling that came up here when I was looking at it with another hat on was, well, trolling, how do you hold it to account? Someone puts a comment on social media, how are they held to account? And yet that can trigger so much hurt and harm, particularly to our First Peoples. And as people who want to see a safer place, how do we support them? Is a question that came to my mind.
I think, can I just say, I think that's very difficult to control that. But I was listening to something this morning, TikTok, I think it was. They have stopped paid advertising about The Voice, against The Voice. So probably one way you can control that on some of the social media is to go directly to Facebook, whoever it is, and object to what they're saying. But they are still allowed to make comments that are unpaid. So that kind of doesn't fix it up. But I do think it's very difficult to stop it because people have always been trolls, but years ago it would be through letters or notes. They didn't have access to social media. It can go wider today and it can go to, a very big audience. So it's very, very difficult. But I was reading too about, we can be a bystander or we can be an upstander. And a bystander just lets things happen and never says anything. But an upstander is someone who says that's not correct, that's not accurate, you need more information or whatever. Just a comment like that. But I personally don't ever respond to it. I couldn't care less what they say. If they say anything about me, I couldn't care less. But I'm at the place now where that doesn't impact on me. But there are a lot of people, it is bullying, and there are a lot of young people in particular who don't know how to handle it. And they are the ones that need support. So there's got to be, I think there's two ways. One is you just, you can ignore that stuff. But I think the other thing is we have to make young people resilient and aware of what that trolling really means. I think that's the thing. We need more information and education about trolling in itself because it is bullying. And we need people to know that's what the outcome. And, you can have a look at what's going on about The Voice at the moment, and, it's all designed, it's all designed to stop it from happening, all designed to stop the referendum. That's all this stuff that's going on at the moment. There's no other reason for it. And it's been happening since the election when the Albanese government said that they were going to have the referendum on The Voice. So straight away, you've got politicians who have put it out there against The Voice. They've brought in Aboriginal people, as Jeremy said, they've brought in Aboriginal people who support the no argument to it, so that it looks like it's legitimate that, people, not everybody agrees, so they can stop it. So you have to educate people. You have to let the wider community know that exactly what The Voice is. Can I just say that years ago, what they did when Bob Hawke got into power, and he said he was going to give us land rights, okay? Well, straight away, the mining companies paid big money to have this advertising campaign in Western Australia where they blacked out the screen because they said Aboriginal people are going to take all the land. You're going to lose your backyard, you're going to lose, and it stopped the land rights debate in its tracks. So I think that the social media does have power, but we have to educate the wider community over here, and we have to start being upstanders so we can say that's not accurate. That's all you need to say, that's not accurate. Anyway, that's my opinion.
And I just have,
It was a,
my name's Roger Jarrett. I'm a Kinchela boy, 75 years old. I was kidnapped in 1958 by a white policy of this government. My life expectancy back then was 40 years old. I've lived to 75. This thing you're talking about, referendum and all this type of stuff, why would you trust a thief that has stolen our land? Everyone can hear it. Why would you trust a thief? Why ain't they now talking this referendum, what they're going to do for us, how they're going to help us, how they're going to put things forward, instead of just putting this up? It's like they say we're given $340 something odd billion annually to the Aboriginal in the land. That's just the say to make discrimination and make people say, look at them black fellas, they get all this money. It's all bloody bullshit. I'm sorry if I get cranky, but I've been around, I've been in the home, and I've been, there's a lot, you know, and we've got to get sensible about it. Why ain't the government doing something about saying what they're going to do so we can all be on the same page? We are here together. We are on Australia. We are the oldest living culture in the world. Christ, if I was somebody, I'd want to jump on board. The Egyptians, they say ancient, were prehistoric. Egyptians, 5,000 years. Mayans, maybe 7. We're prehistoric is how they bloody treat us because they don't communicate with us. They don't talk to us. They don't advertise what's going to happen. Now, it's as simple as that. We all eat from this land. We are one as one family. It's about time the government got off their butt instead of the old English laws they fall into. And they just seem to stay in that language of what they are. They can't get out of it. Hopefully, and we are going around teaching the young ones now about what happened to us. And it's traumatizing. My trauma is passed into the DNA of my family, and every elder is a trauma passed through the DNA, whether you like it or not. I come from a little place called Barraville. That was the most prejudiced place still today in Australia. Mm. But we've got all the time in the world, and the government should put forward to what they want to do and how they're going to help us as a family go forward. Thank you.
Thanks, God.
And that's a big debate there, but can I just say something there? So thank you for that, Roger, that I agree with you. I don't think it's either or. I think the government's got a responsibility to our mob right now to make sure all those social determinants are in line with everybody else. That they need, that's what they have to do. But at the same time, I think they've also got a responsibility to listen to Aboriginal people about how they want to let Parliament know what the real issues are and where the money should go. Right now, at this moment, we're really always dependent on governments, the government that gets in, the government of the day and their goodwill. That's how they fund us. They don't fund us because they love us. So the government that gets in, if they think it's a good idea, they'll fund us. If they don't think it's a good idea, they won't. what I want to see changed, and I think the Voice can do it, is they have to fund us anyway, but they're funding on advice from Aboriginal people, not on their own ministers who decide what they think should happen. And that's the difference I think the Voice will make. I am an advocate for the Voice for that reason, but at the same time, they have a responsibility to our mob to make sure all those social determinants that are down, like over incarceration and the over child protection, all those things are fixed up. That's the responsibility of governments. We all pay taxes. We're all entitled to the same rights as anybody else. And right at this moment, if you look at the social determinants for our mob, they're below everybody else's, way down. I'll give you one stat. Incarceration rates, we looked at that with the Productivity Commission. They said we would not be on a par with non-Aboriginal people until 2050. 2020, and by that time, all other variables could come into play and we'd still be below par. So that's a reality for our mob, but it's not either or. And what's happening at the moment, the trolls and the people out there who have a negative view of it, this is what they're putting out there, so people are believing it. Oh, well, we should fix up all these things and not add the Voice. No, we are too reliant on goodwill of governments for funding right now.
The thing is with the government, where do they get their funding from? This country is ours. Every bloody cent in the land is through mining and everything. They get millions of dollars every minute going out of our land, our country, it's ours.
That's true, Unc. I agree.
We are definitely
Jeremy, I'd like-
entitled to a compensation, but the government's got to wake up and do it. And if they don't compensate us so we can have our own minds, go and get our own things that we want, not for them telling us what they want or how to do it, they're not giving us our rights to do that. They are keeping us down. And with the English law, it's always going to be the same.
Thanks, Uncle Roger. Jeremy, I'd like to bring you in here, and you've worked in the space of, you know, with emotional well-being or mental illness, as it's often referred to. How do we keep ourselves safe at these times of years when we've got all this discussion and divisiveness going on? How do we keep ourselves safe online and just in general discussions like that?
Yeah, I used to do Aboriginal mental health first aid for a number of years, to do that training for a number of years. I stopped recently doing that just before COVID, but all that stuff's really important as well, because having that connection to a strong family connection or a strong community to support you during this area is really important. Esme, like you said, the young kids, they're the ones that I think are copying it the most right now. And we're seeing, unfortunately, across First Nation communities here in Australia and overseas, people taking their own lives due to trolling and things like that, and the bullying, the online harassment. So we have to make sure that we educate the family as well, make sure that they can see signs of when things are happening, so you can address that. Because it can be a gradual thing, or it can be something that happens really fast. But if we can educate people just the basics of understanding mental health in our community, understanding the factors that go in it, and also the signs that might lead to someone who might take their life by suicide, whether it be isolating themselves, giving their property away, cutting themselves, things like that. If we see that with our friends and family, we can take steps, and don't stand back if you see something. The biggest thing I always see is, always in training, is it's okay to ask someone if they're thinking about suicide, because put it straight out there. If they say yes, you put the things in place. If they say no, but I'm facing issues or I'm getting this abuse online, you can work around that as well. The beauty of a lot of, for our age, social media stuff, we can block people. But the younger ones, it's usually some of their friends or some of their friends of friends and things like that, if they don't block. And sometimes we don't know what's happening until it's too late. We've had a few young members who have attempted suicide, and we've actually worked through it and things like that. And that was because of abuse, because they were either dating a non-Aboriginal person or friends with non-Aboriginal people, and certain people in their connections didn't like that. You get trolls all the time about that. Like, we've had trolls with Babana because we work with you guys at Annecto. We've had trolls because we have the police invited to our meetings, things like that. We cop it online all the time. People don't realise how much abuse we cop. Uncle Mark is our chairman, he's had death threats and things like that. But he's a strong, resilient bloke, so he deals with that. But there's times when he comes to us and we have a good yarn and things like that. But I think having that, talking about it with your kids or your family or anyone, your friends, and don't be a bystander, like Esme said. Take a step up. If you see something, be part of it, because we don't want to lose any lives. And unfortunately, with trolls, we've seen it happen. It's not just our people as well; it's non-Aboriginal people as well who have died by suicide through online trolling. We've seen some in the media. Don't see too many black fellas in the media about that, but we're seeing some of the non-Indigenous ones. But if it's happening there, it's probably a tenfold in our community. That's something we have to understand as well. And I think it's really important to look at what we're doing as a community and making sure your workplace is safe, your family connections and things that are safe as well, culturally safe, as I'm saying, and understanding the different cultural obligations and things like that. I think one of the important things as well with education is understand that our community is mostly in Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne area. I mean, we're not in the sticks like they're trying to say in the media, like with Alice Springs or this and that. There's a small population of people there. Of course, we're higher because traditional owners are out there. But you got to understand as well where our people are, and understand that the history. Like, some people in Sydney might not be connected as culture as someone else, and understand their journey. Everyone's got a different journey. If you can understand that personal journey of that person, because they might talk to stuff. I'm not black because I haven't lived in a community, or I don't know language, blah blah blah. But each person, I value them on their face value, and like I said, if you can understand if there's issues they're facing, you can usually tell pretty much if you see some drastic changes. Have a yarn to them. Take them aside. Don't do it in front of other people, of course, because they might not feel comfortable. But say, "Oh, brothers, sisters, have a yarn and talk through some issues." And if you do that, don't be afraid to hear that someone's wants to commit suicide. If they do, address that. There's steps that you can take. There's mental health first aid basic steps. I'm pretty sure I can share that to Mike. Some of those ones he can share out to you guys as well.
Right there, and I just remember I might share this, that last night I saw comments on Facebook in relation to Ashley Gardner, who is a moral warrior woman who is playing in the Australian women's cricket team. And apparently there's a scheduled game on January 26th for the women to play, and she's saying that she's not comfortable with that. And then one of the first comments that I saw on that was dissecting a person's Aboriginality. They, let the white part of her, play the game or whatever. And I'm like, why in the hell are we, people still saying this sort of crap? And, and that's the sort of things that we've got to put up with on social media. My first reaction was to really get angry and reply to that, but I just had to hold myself back and say it's not worth the mental trauma that I will go through, to actually say anything to those sort of comments.
Can I just say something? Didn't they arrive here on the 8th of January, 1788 at Botany Bay? Has anybody got the knowledge of that? 8th of January, 878 or what it was.
1878, 1788, I mean.
So 1788, 8th of January, they tried to get to Botany Bay. Now, the thing is, with the Aboriginal people, and I'm one, why won't they use the common sense and ask them what day would they like Australia Day? This is their country and everybody's welcome to it. Why don't they just ask that? And up our way in the country is just another thing. You're talking about different things. There is no employment in the country. So the kid's going to run right and steal and end up in incarceration. You talk to the government and they don't put any infrastructure in the country, and yet they get things made in China and somewhere a bit cheaper. But they don't care about the black fella. He's put on a bloody doll. They just keep him in check as a number. These are all facts. They're looking at you. Number, that's it, on the doll. Why don't they get him to work for it? Become a human being instead of just sitting back idle to work. And that's what happens. That's where the stigma comes from. Lazy, good for nothing black fella. Because they got him on the dial and they got him numbered. They want him to stay that way. I don't know, through popularity or through their psychological, whatever it is, to keep us down. All these things are there in front of our eyes. We can change. We can make a difference. Ta.
And talking about change, Uncle Roger, I'd like Tiffany in on this, and she you've been an advocate for Aboriginal people for a long time, Tiffany. How did you become an ally and an advocate for Aboriginal people, and do you have any advice for our fellow Australians?
Thanks, Paulette. You know, I've just come back from Turtle Island, which is now contemporary Canada, United States, and South America and Central America, and grew up in the United States. And I can honestly say I've learned more about Native American experiences here in Australia than I did growing up. And I think I say that because I think we can always have mirrors in our lives that can help us. And as a non-Aboriginal person, and especially working with Aboriginal people, you need to, I heard a great quote, take the cotton out of your ears and put it in your mouth. So you can actually hear what people are saying and listen to what people are saying, and to change your thought process and what you think you know or what you know. Because you might think you have solutions and ideas, but you really need to understand what, in this case, Aboriginal people are saying, living, have been working on for generations in communities. And it's letting go of your ego, really, in a lot of this. Because at the end of the day, I can go to my home and I can switch off in many ways. In the community, you can't. You're living with this in your own lived experience, your family's lived experience. And there's a beautiful saying for Native American tribes, and that is, we make a decision for the 6th generation after us. And if non-Aboriginal people can start to think, what is the legacy of our impact today for what Aboriginal people are saying they want for the future of their families and communities, you start to change your thought process. I hate this period. The 13th of February is another time for the National Apology Anniversary, Sorry Day, the trolling, the constant hypervigilance that we have Aboriginal people have to experience. It's not right. And I guess as a non-Aboriginal person, it's that upstanding. It's calling out the bad behavior. It's calling out the racism. It's calling out the biases that people hold and they don't even think they hold. And it's educating each other so that we're not constantly having to have an Aboriginal person say, that's racist. What are you going to do about it? We think we've advanced enough to know what is racism. And if you don't, talk to other non-Aboriginal people as well. Having spaces that are culturally safe requires non-Aboriginal people to understand how to support those spaces. So it sits with us, our accountability. In our space, and Uncle Roger, in what he's talking about with the voice, we had the the opportunity for the uncles when the voice consultation was happening to really have an almost private session because no one else was there, with Mick Good at the time, who was facilitating it. And the uncles rightly said, you're wanting us to input into draft discussions where you haven't even thought about creating the space for stolen generation survivors. So if this is something that the uncles and aunties are already facing, let alone with now this bigger national conversation, it's a lot. And I think non-Aboriginal people always say we want to do the right thing. Well, the right thing is slowing down what you think is the right thing so you can be part of shared spaces to really hear what Aboriginal people are saying. And, you know, that reflects in the work that we do. In our partnership with Annecto, it's a constant learning of how do you provide culturally safe, trauma-informed aged care supports to stolen generation survivors, to Aboriginal people, to other communities. But if we don't journey this together and, I guess, reflect constantly on where you're walking this journey, because you might think that you're walking it in partnership, but you may not be in your actions. And it takes a lot of humility, but needed humility to acknowledge I might have said the wrong thing or done the wrong thing. I want to learn and keep growing with that, but you can't do it on your own or with your own good intentions. I don't know if that made sense. Sorry, waffling.
No, you made some good points there, Tiffany, as well, and I think, you know, people can take some good advice out of their into their own lives and becoming an ally as well. And was this something that you just fell into, or did you actually set out to become an advocate for Aboriginal people here?
It was really, I mean, I came to this through research and education, and I'll never forget the day. So I was in Manchester in the UK and thinking about a wonderful research project and reading my books. And I happened to read a book by Peter Reid, and it was about the stolen generations. And the way that impacted me, I guess, at a human level, around the fact that you could create policies to forcibly remove Aboriginal children from their families and communities. I can't explain it. It just hit me in such a way, and whether or not that tapped into some of the legacies in my own family and family trauma and generational trauma in that way, I can't say. But ever since then, I haven't been able to stop. And I guess I felt awkward when you approached me, Paulette, with identifying me as an ally, because I think that can be a loaded term as well. I think I tried to hold the trust that the uncles and other Aboriginal people have given me to do and inform the work that I do. But I think, if anything, I would say it's a way of being that is leading from behind and supporting really what, in this case, the uncles have the vision and the guidance and the wisdom to lead for change. And if we as non-Aboriginal people can continue to support in that way, I think that's what's needed. I hope for the day when we can say decolonization is the project of this nation. And I think that needs to happen in other countries, the US, Canada. There are other ways to exist in this world, and Aboriginal people here have such visions for how to do things differently and should be brought to the fore.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Tiffany, and I, along with a few other people in the chat, really love that quote: "Take the cotton out of your ears and put it in your mouth." And yeah, make sure you listen instead of speaking, and that verse. So I love that quote. I think I'll be using that a lot more often as well. Well,
and I just need to attribute that quote because it's part of a longer quote, and I'm shorting it. But it was Uncle, I'm forgetting his last name. He's out near Burke, Uncle Frank Doolan. Sorry. He actually shared that to an anthropologist in Western Sydney who was working. So credit is due to him. So So again, an Aboriginal wisdom to everyone else.
Deadly, deadly Uncle Frank Doolan as well. And we've got probably about 22 minutes left of this yarn. It's gone very, very quickly. And we might open it to questions. If anybody's got a question that they would like to ask one of the speakers. I know that Tiffany, you might have to leave as well due to your schedule. But for those who have a question, this is your opportunity to ask. You can put it in the chat, or you can unmute and ask your question as well. So does anyone have a question for one of our speakers?
While they're thinking, Paulette, I can just say something too. We need supporters. I don't know what the latest figures are. We were 3% of the population. I think they said we've gone up to 7%. I don't know. But in the 1967 referendum, 90.33% of the people voted yes, and they were not Aboriginal people. A lot of our mob weren't able to vote. So we had a lot of supporters to support us for being counted in the census and for the Commonwealth to legislate on our behalf. So we do need supporters, and we need people to pull apart the arguments that make no sense, that are nonsensical, and they're just based on hearsay and bullying. And I just say that we need allies, or whatever we call them, but we need supporters. And we got a lot of supporters over the years. The Aborigines Advancement League, when we started, had 50 branches. 2 branches were Aboriginal and 48 were non-Aboriginal people who supported us. And over the years, they have put financial support into the organisation. People still pass away today and leave their houses to us. So these people have supported us to be here. We're 65 years old, 66 this year, because people have supported us. And we continue to need that support for any of the policies and that are going around, to make sure our mob get looked after, as Roger said, that people are looked after with those social determinants. Sorry, I just thought I'd say that.
No, thank you for that, Aunty Esme. And it is like you said, that we do need supporters, because just in our population makeup, we only make up a very small percentage of the Australian population these days. And like you said, well, most of those people who voted at the 67 referendum were not Aboriginal, and overwhelmingly positive to include Aboriginal people in the population, and for the government to make laws that for us. That was what the 67 referendum was. And I also kind of remember too, and from being told, that communities like Kempsey on the North Coast, where Annecto works with our community, was the highest, one of the towns with the highest no vote in the 67 referendum. So you can just imagine what some of the attitudes are in the town of Kempsey there, where we have a majority Aboriginal staff in the office, and the majority of Aboriginal people that we support there as well. You can just imagine what sort of attitudes are around in the town as well to this present day as well. Is there anything that you'd like to add as well, Jeremy?
Yeah, I think it's really important to have those allies, whatever you want to call it, supporting us. Paulette, you've been to a few of our events, and Mike's been to I think every event we've organised. Most of those people who come along and provide opportunities aren't black. These are white organisations giving opportunities for employment, educating on health and well-being. The more we can do that and work together, that's how we make real change. We make up like 3 to 7%, whatever it is. I don't know what it is these days. There's always changes, but it's still a small part of that population. So if we can get the support of our non-Indigenous colleagues on board, pushing our agenda and supporting our agenda, I think working with us side by side, not trying to dictate what they think is good for blackfellas, because that's been done too much for us by governments. But I think the ones we work with, like Mike, for example, and a few others that from these non-Aboriginal organisations, they hear what we want in our community and work with us to get that happening. That's why we value the work of Annecto so much. The work providing opportunities for our mob to stay in home care, to get more of our mob working. Like you said, Paulette, up there north now, there's a lot of blackfellas work in the office and things like that. The more we can do that, the better. I'd love to see a lot more than the 3% targets people put on there in employments and things like that. I want to see where we are. So, for example, up north, it could be like 15% population. Let's try and get 15% of our mob into those roles. And working with each other, you know what I mean? Our membership, we've got membership for our men's group. There's Aboriginal members who can vote on things, but we've got another membership group for our non-Aboriginal men, so they can be part of it and come to our events, come to our monthly meetings, and listen. Mike would probably tell you, when he comes to our meetings, listen to the young guys and the old guys next to him, talk about their journey, and he can sometimes say, I can help out with this, or referrals and things like that. So working like that and being a part of our community, don't be afraid to ask questions either. I know sometimes it's hard to ask a question to any community. And that's why, I'm not sure if people have seen, but about 3 or 4 years ago, I work at University of Sydney as well, but we put a video, Ask Us Anything Aboriginal. All the schools use it up here now, which is awesome. But I might put the link in chat, because it's a really good thing. And people just ask us random questions, and we didn't know that until like 5 to 4 who we're going to be with and things like that. And I met the girl I was with, I think I met her before we got on the camera, and it was just an interaction and understanding why sometimes people don't want to ask the questions. They want to seem bad or naive or uninformed. But don't worry about that. There's no shame. If you want to know something, ask us. We're happy to help out. That's the thing. From the elders like Uncle Rog down to our young ones, we can help out and things like that.
Absolutely. So don't be shame, be game, as we like to say. If you'd like to ask something, yeah, please do. Mike, you're muted, so I think you might have something that you'd like to say.
I think Jeremy raised a really good question, and Aunty as well, around that education space, but it's a two-way conversation when we're learning. There's an ongoing joke that, Paulette, you might actually be my boss, for example. And the reality is we have to create spaces where we can be corrected or humble enough to listen to something that may be different to what we understand or our worldview. And that's not an easy thing to do. It's not easy to do that. And the privilege that we have, I think, at Annecto, is that we've built mutual relationships where we can hear those things and learn. First Peoples Engagement Committee, getting along to some of the things that we want to support in Victoria. And you will get times where you'll be told something that you go, oh, okay, I need to go away and think about that. That's a good thing. But I also was reminded of what Tiffany was saying around, well, it's not just about solidarity, it's also about understanding that the system is working against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. What does it mean to be a part of dismantling, or at least reflecting on a system like that? I don't know what the answer to that is, but yeah, they're powerful questions.
Yeah, I remember Tiffany mentioning something like, the need to redesign the systems. But how do we do that? And it seems such a big thing. How do we even approach something like that, I guess, is my question.
I think, and she talked about decolonisation, and I think that is a big process because all of us are so used to colonisation. All our systems are built on it. Our education system, our social justice, everything, our legal system, all built on colonisation. So to decolonise takes a real effort, and it's a real effort by everybody. I think one of the things we have to do individually is to have a look at our own cultural biases and unpack them and see where they come from. I think we all have them. I mean, I have them. I'm not really fussed on non-Aboriginal people. Sorry, I hate to tell you guys, but you know, coming through the missions, being on the missions and reserves, living the way we've lived, all the poverty, everything, all my grandmother's stories and everything that's happened, it does give me a view that is not pro non-Aboriginal people. So I have to look at my own biases and say, where has that come from? And is there any reality to it? Why have you got it? And I do that. And I've done it because we live in this society. So you can't just shut yourself off and just stay over there and not know where these views come from. So I think the first thing we all have to do is unpack our biases and say our biases come from mum because mum, or from Nan, or from the media. I mean, the media have got a big role to play. We're talking about trolls online, social media, but actually the media is really, really bad. When you look at the Australian, you look at the Herald Sun, you look at all the things that have been coming up about The Voice, for example, about Australia Day and changing the date, they are impacting on a lot of people out there because what we read in the media, we believe. It's like the media is telling, but that's not necessarily the way it is. The media don't always tell the truth. The media put forward a point of view by the person who's writing the post or the people they're interviewing, and they interview people deliberately to get their opinions right. So we've got to unpack all that as well. And if we don't unpack all that, we're just going to go along with the tide, do whatever everybody else does and say what everyone else says, and we're not going to get anywhere. You can't decolonise unless you start to question how colonisation is set up in all the parts that are there now, and then start to pull that down. Even language. Let's take, for example, the Maroondah Hospital. Now, the Premier wanted to rename that the Queen Elizabeth Hospital after Queen Elizabeth because she passed away. It's the only hospital in Melbourne, in Victoria, that has an Aboriginal name. That in itself is ridiculous. Why? And he's building a new hospital out in the west. Why would you take that name away from that hospital there, the only Aboriginal name, sort of a Wurundjeri name, when you've got a hospital you can name the Queen Elizabeth Hospital anyway? But that just shows you that that's about colonisation, because the Queen is about colonisation, the King Charles is about colonisation. So you continue to uphold the values of a country that has colonised this country. And that's something that, oh, that's a great idea, we'll name it after Queen Elizabeth. But no one's thinking, well, you're going to take away an Aboriginal name, the First Nations, and name it after a queen, the people who colonised the country. Isn't that really just emphasising colonisation? And we don't think about it. We think, oh, you know, well, why not? What's the problem? There's a big issue.
Not only stole Australia, every town, every street, every sign is in the whitefellas' words. If any whitefellas are, I apologise, but I'm telling you the truth. They've taken over Australia, not by invasion, as well as naming everything in their name. We've got to get back some of our names in different parts of the country to give us a positive way of saying that people are listening to us by giving us our names back. Because every town, as I said, every sign is a whitefella sign, except for up here we've got Woombangi away. We've got a couple of things in, other people have got them too. So, you know, we've got to start doing that.
Yeah, Roger, I think one thing there, mate, as well, they make it too hard, don't they? So they make it too hard for us to use those names. For example, at University of Sydney, I'm in medicine health. We actually named our free Sydney precincts after Aboriginal leaders in the history. It took 18 months to get approval. I mean, so they put things, those roadblocks in front to try and stop things. And it'd be good to have like your names or names of our mob on those street signs, wouldn't they? All over the place.
Jeremy, how long did it take you?
Oh, sorry,
Well,
we
you
lost
just
you
gotta
there.
transfer it around.
We lost you there a
18
little
months.
bit, Uncle
We
Rod.
can work together.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And people have supported us for that.
Yes,
We
exactly.
need support. We need support.
Yes.
That's the one thing I'd say today is we need support. And the other thing I'd say is if you don't know anything about Aboriginal people or the history, you need to educate yourself because people tell lies all the time about us. You need to know exactly what happened so that when people have got trauma, you can say, I understand. That's what we need. I understand what's going on here. Then we can deal with it once we understand. Once we're on the same page with each other, we can deal with it and we can go forward. And changing the date for Australia Day is simple. Honestly, it is not a big task. It won't, it will, what it will do is will unite people better. We will still have people who don't agree with Australia Day anyway, but it will unite people who at the moment are on the fence or on the other side. So I think that's simple. And having the voice, all I want you to do about the voice is really look at the facts. Don't listen to what the opposition are saying or this person's saying. Look at the facts and make up your own mind. Do not make up your mind based on what people are saying. Look at what the voice is really about and then say yes or no. I'm fine with your decision at the end, as long as you know what it really means. And I think that's the issue. Educate ourselves, know what's really happening, and then make our decisions based on us, not on what the trolls are saying, not what the media is saying, but on what we have found out for ourselves. And I think that's important. And support us. Just support us.
We have a question from the staff. Sebastian, here's your floor. Ask away for your question.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing everything that you've opened up about, and it's yeah, really enlightening and opening my eyes. I suppose my question is more directed around being an immigrant in the country or first generation. A lot of that type of history and knowledge and trauma and trolling was never really, taught to me except what I got from bits and pieces at school. Thinking about now the newer generation of immigrants coming into the country, what I know there's not much time to open into that conversation, but where would you direct that type of those questions that they might have, or informing of what is actually happening that they have no idea about? I grew up understanding that Australia Day was Australia's Independence Day, as in, oh, we're our own country. But which now knowing what I know now, it's the whole meaning's changed completely. It's gone from just a holiday, not having any cultural or significance to me personally or to my family, and assuming that the same mindset might be happening to new families.
I think there's a lot of information that's available on what's happened with our mobs. There's a great thing called Google, and they have a lot of good information that's true. So I think there's a lot of information around today that never was before. So I think that's one thing you can do to educate. So I think that people who've just come here, they don't get a real understanding about Aboriginal people because we're kind of hidden in a way from people, unless there's something in the media. And most of the things in the media are negative anyway. We don't really hear positive stories. But I think you can educate yourself. There's a lot of things online now that you could get. And just to find out what's exactly happened. I do a set of history milestone cards that really talk about the history of relationship between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people in the country. There's a lot of information out there, a lot of resources around today, a lot more than there ever was before. So I would suggest that.
Yeah, I'd also suggest be a part of the community. If you know there's an Aboriginal organisation,
Yes.
a men's group, a women's group in the area, don't be afraid to go and have a yarn to them. Learn more about the culture. Like learn more about KBH, for example, the things that Roger and those guys went through. Not afraid to be
Roger.
working with you as well.
I'd like, while I got opportunity to thank Annecto
Yes.
for bringing me into it. I feel privileged, and I feel privileged to all you people on screen for what you are doing for us. You know, you are doing a fantastic job, and I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
And Megan, you've got your hand up, so you want to ask a question.
Good
Good question.
throw, Aunt.
Sorry.
I was just going to say I was going to you next, Megan. So thanks for the throw, Aunty.
Sorry. So Jeremy, would you say that due to trauma and trolls, Aboriginals experience more mental health problems than the English would?
They
I think
definitely,
that's a fact.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
I think it's a fact that our mob
Yeah,
are in that situation. The suicide rate is ridiculous. Our mob do experience more trauma, and a lot of young people can't cope. I don't know what that's not my computer playing up. A lot of people can't cope. A lot of young people can't cope.
I
And
feel
I
like
think
it would be a good suggestion to work on with the government too, mental health in the Aboriginal communities.
Yeah, one thing as well, Megan, that people not realise, it's going to be a new. It's the first ever suicide prevention framework based on our First Nation people. It's been developed by the health department. One of the guys who comes to our men's group is actually leading that. So it's the first time they've actually done that, and they're working with Aboriginal groups in the community about that. So hopefully when that gets released, we can share that around as well, because I think it's really important to understand the suicide rates are so much higher, mental health is so much higher, non-suicide injuries less about people. That's cutting yourself, punching yourself, things like that. Understand those issues and the trauma that we get faced, and being black is just another part of trauma we face every day.
So young people face all the normal things, but then on added layers of racism and all the stereotypes about what an Aboriginal person is, for example. That's really hurtful. Like, I'm not exactly black. My mum asked me why I was so big. But I'm an Aboriginal woman and I'm proud of it. But people always ask, what makes you Aboriginal? It's not about the colour of your skin. So even that's traumatic for our young kids in schools. People have said, well, you're not really Aboriginal, are you? So that's traumatic for them, for their identity. So even that in itself is a really hard thing for them to deal with. And there's a lot of trauma associated with that.
the trauma associated with that is every black person, if they want to get a job or they want to get a doll or want to get something like that, have to prove they're Aboriginal. Now, the white fellow doesn't have to prove he's white. Why?
That's another discussion.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, everyone, particularly to our guest speakers, Jeremy, Aunty Esme, and also Tiffany as well. We could talk about this all day. We've reached 1 minute past 2. We were supposed to finish at 2, so I'm sure this conversation could go on forever. If you do want to ask any other questions or want to be put in touch with any of our guest speakers today, just send me an email, paulette.annecto.au, and I can direct those questions to our speakers and put you in touch as well. And yeah, it's been a great conversation, and I hope this is just the start of your learning journey in this space as well. If this is maybe one of the first conversations that you've been with, and there'll be a lot more that you'll be able to learn as well. Different people have put some links to various things in the chat as well. So if you want to have a bit of a look at that before you leave the conversation today, just to get a few hints on where you can get some more information. I think, Mike, you had a couple of bits of advice and a couple of options there as well for people to look at. So you might want to mention those before we go. And also I would add to that, your local reconciliation groups as well are generally a good place to start. They are connected with Aboriginal organisations and individuals as well, and are people that you know, have been advocates and allies as well. So you can find your local reconciliation group on the Reconciliation Australia website. Just another point as well. But Mike, you might want to share a couple of things there as well.
Look, I'll make it pretty clear and succinct. If you work with Annecto, you've got an obligation to educate yourself, because we work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We have a training course that we obviously do with Annecto, but we also have other opportunities for you to do that. But we're about being inclusive. That's what this organisation is here for. And to do that, we have to educate ourselves. I'll put up there the Uluru Statement because they have a little course that you do. It takes about 20 minutes and it gives you an understanding of what the voice is about, what it is, what it isn't. And I actually thought it was really, really well done, and I learned stuff while I was doing it. So yeah, we've all got an obligation, I think, to walk away and say, what is it that we want to educate ourselves on more? I personally just want to thank Uncle Roger and Aunty Esme. I know Tiffany's not here, but Jez, to me, has been someone I've learned a lot of over the years. So I've really appreciated the discussion. And Paulette, the fact that you inspired this conversation by saying, actually, we need something to, before we get to Jan 26 and ducking for cover, let's have the conversation beforehand. So thank you for your leadership in this space as well. I know I said more than I was supposed to, but anyway.
And I say change the date.
No matter what date they change it to, you'll always get a bloody whinger.
I think too, with along comes with changing the data. I think that people need to change their attitude as well, because what do they celebrate? They have the tall ships. They celebrate the tall ships coming in. That is the start of genocide and colonisation. Our mob. We don't want to celebrate tall ships. We don't want to reenact all that stuff. So I think there's an attitude that needs to be changed about what the National Day actually is about. As well. That's just my thoughts anyway, but thank you so much to everybody for spending your lunch hour with us and taking time out of your day to be part of this conversation. I hope you have enjoyed, learnt a thing or two, and if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to send me an email or give me a call. For those, I just realised that I didn't introduce myself first up, just thinking that everybody knows who I am. But my name is Paulette Whitton, and I'm Annecto's Aboriginal Liaison Officer. So any questions that you have in relation to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, please don't hesitate to send my way as well. And we do have a First Peoples Engagement Committee that I chair, but a lot of the times I'm the only Aboriginal person in that particular room. It's about educating and informing our staff and increasing the knowledge and confidence of Annecto staff in that weekly meeting as well. And I can see that we've got a few of our members of the First Peoples Engagement Committee are in with us as well. So many thanks to that as well. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, Aunty Esme, Jeremy, and Uncle Roger, and also Tiffany as well. And thank you everyone for sharing today.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Paulette.
Pleasure.
Cheers.
Aye.